This is from China's Cosmopolitan Empire, written by Mark Edward Lewis. Many women who were active Taoists left behind no traces in the written record. Yet we can get a sense of their number from the fact that under Emperor Xuanzong, there were 1,137 Taoist temples for men and 550 for women. And we can learn something of their activities from the conventions of Tang poetry. Poets wrote about women of their acquaintance, usually in some position at court, who departed secular life to become novices in Taoist temples. These poems usually focused on cutting off the hair, removing makeup, and replacing elaborate court costumes with monastic garb. She leaves off combing her thicket of side locks and washes off her rouge. On her head, a lotus blossom crown as she emerges from the palace of never-ending life. As other disciples fetch away the verses and repetitives she sang, other palace women separate and distribute her dancing cloaks and chemises. They often ended with imagined visions of the new novice soaring off in meditative flights through space. Others referred to the intention of the new nun, often described as a fallen immortal, which was the Taoist equivalent of the bodhisattva ideal in Buddhism, to use the powers she would soon acquire to save all living beings. Many poems describe female Taoist masters in terms generally applied to men, except that the poet often hinted at an element of erotic attraction between him and his subject. Most dealt with female, refined masters, charismatic figures who had no administrative tasks in the temples to which their presence brought prestige. The poems describe the great age or spiritual attainments of such masters and the paradises to which they could soar. Other poems told of eminent Taoist women who became recluses in the mountains, where the poet traveled to seek them out. They described the women's ascetic practices, such as fasting, which facilitated the lightening of the body and attainment of visions. Finally, much poetry on Taoist women was dedicated to those whom poets depicted as lovers or companions, and whose links to religious institutions were unclear. While many women remained celibate to pursue religious goals, Du Guanting accepted marriage as one route to transcendence. Divine marriage between mortal men and goddesses figured in the Shanqing tradition as a central ritual and an aspect of textual revelations. Some poetry on Taoist women as lovers described affairs with them as journeys through the cosmos, as in this quatrain by Li Shangyin, addressed to two sisters who were Taoist nuns. Stealing peaches of immortality and snatching drugs, these are difficult to do together. In the middle of the 12-layered city walls, we locked up the multicolored moon toad. We should taste them together with the elixir on the same night. Then the jade-storied buildings will be nothing but these rock crystal curtains. Here, the poet pretends that in sharing peaches and elixirs of immortality with the sisters, he could transform his bedroom into a celestial paradise. Finally, The imagery of Taoist goddesses was used to celebrate the beauty of women who had no religious calling. The use of goddesses as erotic figures dates back at least to Warring States poems in the Songs of the South, Chusi anthology. The Queen Mother of the West, the archetypal Taoist divinity, similarly became an erotically charged figure in stories of her liaison with Emperor Wu of the Han. In the Tang, this literary tradition fused with the emerging practice of poems by and about courtesans and dancers. The most striking example was a lesbian love poem about 3 orphaned sisters who became courtesans and famous musicians. It was written by a woman who was herself a celebrated courtesan, Taoist nun, and poet Yu Xuanji, 844 to 868. Yu invoked references ranging from the classic beauty Xi to Taoist paradises and the Queen Mother to celebrate the 3 beauties. Other poems used the same images to portray dancers and prostitutes, and a common vocabulary developed between certain sexual practices and techniques of attaining immortality. This overlap between the worlds of the temple and the brothel found expression in the emergence of the Taoist Queen Mother of the West as the patron divinity of the prostitutes and female musicians who filled the pleasure quarters of Tang cities. That's about a page and a half from China's Cosmopolitan Empire, written by Mark Edward Lewis. Please forgive my mispronunciation of the pinyin transliterations. Not that I would be able to pronounce them if I knew the Chinese characters, but I have a hard time with reading pinyin, as I do with reading Wade Giles. So, thank you for stopping by my channel and listening to this excerpt from Mark Edward Lewis, a historian on ancient China whose work I recommend.